I have the very great pleasure of introducing you to our guest speaker, Vince Bravo, who will be having a conversation on stage with our Deputy Director, Dr. Laura Mueller. Vince Bravo is a passionate collector and researcher of the design world of Alexander Girard. Over the years, he has amassed an extensive collection of textiles, graphic design, furniture, drawings, and personal items. As a specialized Girard collector and a dealer of mid-century modern furniture and design, Vince is recognized as a go-to source for information about modern American design in the mid-century. In mid-2014, after acquiring a number of pieces of Herman Miller furniture with Textiles by Girard, Bravo began to feel closer connection and interest in the works of Girard. And while Girard upholstered Eames chairs came and went before, there was something different this time. And since then, Bravo has suspended most other collecting to focus on acquisitions of the design works of Girard. With a willingness to share information, he has worked to digitize much of his collection for others to enjoy. And through sharing images on Instagram, check him out at Mr. Vince Bravo, partnering with Toad Archive, who documented over 3,000 photographs of textiles for their online archives, and running a Facebook group dedicated to Alexander Girard, Bravo remains committed to the legacy of Girard's work. Please help me welcome Vince Bravo.
Thank you, Kate. Vince, it's a pleasure to talk with you today, to learn about your passion and love of the work of Alexander Girard. Everyone here today has their own personal story of how Girard's work and a visit to multiple visions has touched them. In the short 6 months I have been with the Museum of International Folk Art, I have learned many stories of how a visit to multiple visions changed their life. To get us started, please share with us your personal story as a collector. How did you get into collecting, and what have been other areas of your collecting, and how did you come to narrow your focus on the work specifically of Girard?
Thanks so much. Appreciate the introduction. I really appreciate being here. This is my third time here at the museum, and every time I've been here, either doing research or visiting or being here for this symposium, everyone has been so gracious and nice. And to speak to your question, I began dealing in vintage wear, antiques, and decorative arts in the early 90s. Just out of high school, I started my own business selling vintage stuff in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my focus was really on, what I would say would be considered anything that was modern from the last century. At that point, of course, the century hadn't turned, but I originally began selling a lot of California pottery, vintage clothing, furniture. Specifically, I was very interested in Haywood Wakefield, kind of a more kitschy kind of 50s look. And then, as the introduction said, I definitely sold quite a bit of Herman Miller furniture, but never really paid much attention to the Girard textile that was on it. And then something changed. I had a great set of chairs that I just didn't want to sell. And I thought to myself, maybe it's no longer time to collect California pottery. Maybe it's not a time to be as diverse as we have been in our collecting. And so really focused as much as I could on acquiring Girard items. Oftentimes people ask me about selling Girard items. I don't sell Girard items, I just collect them. Which could, I might be channeling a little of Girard DNA there in the acquisition aspect of it and not the relinquishing of it. But realistically, it started with just a couple of pieces of furniture and has been an adventure for quite a while. As with my other collecting, I am always very interested in a historical perspective of things, and so I really want to understand the thing that I'm collecting. I also, like Girard, like things in many colors, and so when I collected California pottery, it wasn't that you needed one example, you needed all 7 color examples. And so, I decided that no longer was the collection that I wanted anymore, and I wanted to be a part of this collection, for sure.
That's fantastic. And since we're here for the 40th anniversary, do you have any recollections or thoughts on that momentous occasion, for the 40th anniversary of the opening of Multiple Visions?
Yeah, you'll see today in all of my slides that I'm presenting here, they are all images that I have collected over the years, and included in that is quite a few slide collections of people who traveled to New York and saw La Fonda del Sol, people who were here on opening day to see this exhibit opening. And I would say, I love looking at this photo. I love the color scheme of the photos. I know there's an element of it that's just the dated photography of it. But there's also a muted pastel to this that it's charming. Attached on this slide as well is the initial mailer. It's a small 8.5 by 11 folded mailer inviting people to the opening celebration. I've long before I came here, I of course owned the book about the exhibit. I spent a lot of time looking at the slides. In this collection of opening day, the person who was here photographed every single exhibit, every single showcase. And so it was an experience that I had before I ever stepped foot here. As well, in another collection, I have a slide collection that is all of the hemisphere display, which Girard did in '68 in Texas, that mirrors this a lot. That there are definitely some exhibits that we can find pretty much the exact same materials being used.
That's great. You own a number of works from the Scorn house in Northern California. Can you tell us a little bit about the house and some of the pieces that you've been able to collect? And which pieces that you own do you think are quintessentially Girard, and why?
Thanks. Yeah, the Scorn house is often photographed. It recently was for sale, and so it got a lot of press. It got press in the time of Dwell magazine, and other design magazines saw this as a Don Knorr construction, California architect. Don Knorr constructed it for the Scorn family in '69, and Alexander Girard did the entire interior of the house. I was lucky at one point to find this image of Girard, O'Keeffe, and Robert together here in the Santa Fe house. This house, of course, is an amazing piece of California architecture, and so while the exterior is very Don Knorr, it's very open air, very inside-outside sort of living, it is impossible to ignore the Girard aspect of it. From the 10-foot enamel doors that welcome you when you get onto the property. Scorn said of these doors, they're enamel doors, so it's not a painting, it's not, a mosaic, it is enamel. And as Scorn said, Scorn was also Girard and O'Keeffe's dentist. He said that they were like veneers, like the front doors were like veneers, as in melted glass. The Scorn aspect that I have been able to acquire is the grouping of items are so personal, and they had a friendship that dated back before the construction of the house. Girard actually had decorated Dr. Scorn's dentist office. I don't have any materials on that, and so I'm always looking for more information. But I've enjoyed learning a lot through archives, or even some of the letters that I have, like this great letter where Alexander asks Scorn to not throw away the dental tools, but instead to send them to him. Questioning what we thought a little bit about what Sandro might be doing with those dental tools. Yeah, and so, I think that, as I said, the doors are pretty significant. They unfortunately are no longer, or fortunate for the Scorn family, they are, when they sold the house, they were removed and they are with the family. But I have this lovely drawing of the concept drawing. The Vitro Museum also has another example that's a little bit different. I think that this example that I have is the production one that would have been sent to the people who were making the doors. I've seen one other example of this that actually opens up that Girard had made, and then there was like kind of the outside once you opened up the doors. It was like you could look through the windows outside. You know, the house itself was featured in Sunset magazine, pretty well-known California magazine, and you can see somewhat of why Scorn and Girard were good friends. The love of folk art, the love of toys, the love of display. Girard built for Dr. Scorn this redwood shelving unit on the right-hand side. It has a window behind it, and made of redwood, matched the rest of the house, and it really was a place to display collections. It was a non-production, obviously, display wall. As well, all the way to the left, you can see, it's very small in this image, but there's a collection of religious images that have been framed by Girard. I can only imagine how heavy that is, having felt some of the things that Girard has framed. He's notorious for using plywood as backerboard. So it's like you've got the frame, you've got the piece of art, and then you have another piece of wood behind it. You know, the Scorn house really was I think, in a lot of ways, an opportunity for Girard to also think about fabric and the use of textiles. Robert Scorn, like myself, loves textiles, and so I've been lucky enough to acquire this massive roll, which I didn't quite realize was actually, 10 different fabrics rolled one on top of the other. And so it was an archaeological dig as I unrolled those. But to understand the Scorn house, you have to understand that fabric was used in every room, and Girard was present in every room. On the left, the use of paleo, my favorite textile, in the main bedroom, and then on the right, Eden was in the guest room, or one of the guest bedrooms. And both of those, that use of textile is amazing. But most importantly, to really kind of answer your question, I think his use of textiles on this 55-foot wall that kind of cut the house in half is amazing. It's a very different technique, obviously, to display, one, his fabric, but two, also to get you into the space. You can see all the way to the right-hand side, that's actually the dining room area, and then moving into the kitchen, and then moving into kind of an office sort of area. There's 95 different, I think it's 95, different cabinets, each one wrapped in a textile. The top board across those 4 boards across the top are the 4 different planning panels that Girard used to kind of pitch this to Scorn. And so it was, if you just came across those boards and didn't really know that the end product was, the major interior feature of the house, those boards would be lost. But recently, really for this presentation, I gathered together a number of the executions of it and put them along with the boards above. Interestingly enough, you can see Tunsi's work there. Girard's brother, Tunsi, the ceramicist, there's many of his pieces over in the exhibit. There's a ring of his pieces right there. There's so many things I could talk about this house. Really every flat surface was covered in fabric in this house, including closet doors. Those are Girard designed knobs that were used at La Fonda del Sol as well. Shelving was all wrapped in fabric, stuff like that. I'm also lucky enough to own a later piece that Girard designed for the house, for a guest house that was added on later, mirroring the master bedroom display. This, actually, I was just taken as I was looking at the baptism scene out in the display here to see very similar kind of shapes as well as the painting around it, very similar. And I think for me, my favorite piece from this house you'll see later, I think, which we'll talk about.
Great. So you've collected objects in ephemeron from 2 of Girard's celebrated designed interiors for restaurants, L'Etoile and La Fonda del Sol in New York. In both of these projects, Girard created numerous elements, from sugar packets to the interior layout. He was a designer who literally designed from the spoon to the city, as the Italian architect Ernesto Rogers famously described it. What do you think collecting these parts that comprise the whole teach us about his creative vision and desire to design a full experience in those spaces?
Yeah, well, to start off on that, I made a big mistake early on in collecting and telling people that I didn't buy paper, and I didn't buy paper objects when people tried to sell me things. And so I feel like there were a number of items from La Fonda del Sol in particular that I missed out on for sure. Maybe they'll come back onto the market at some point. But now I do collect paper stuff. And so while La Fonda del Sol is to answer your question directly, I think it speaks really to the fact that, the number one tagline for Girard is architect. And yet there is so little architecture that people look at and say, Girard, that is a Girard design. One house remains intact in Grosse Pointe. He's the secondary architect on the Miller House, secondary architect, etc., in a number of different cases. But I think one of the things that we can learn from La Fonda del Sol and Étoile is that, of course, he was the interior architect, the architect of the space. And here you can see some travel slides. These are less commonly produced pieces in the design. Of course, the very large sun itself, right in the main dining room, the enameled Spanish language menu items behind the open air kitchen, the cart with the very traditional sun. On the top right, you can see the Costa Rican wagon wheel, which is also currently has its resting place here in the museum. You can also see how he brought his display of folk art into this space as well. And so, and what was great about this is you can see from the wheel at the top is that cove looks into the Rosewood Bar, which is on the other side. And so much like in the collection here, that you get to experience things from both sides. You look at it from one side when you're at the bar, you look at another side when you're over in the restaurant. Always thinking of not just the design itself, but how we would interact with that design and see it from different perspectives, without a doubt. The paper stuff is silly, to say the least, at times. The thought that someone would save a La Fonda del Sol hot tortilla bag. In fact, 2 people did, because I do have 2 of them. Which is really, it's a lovely, when I found the first one, I bought it from a man who went to La Fonda del Sol for his 16th birthday, and he folded that up and put it in a drawer. And he unfolded it and sold it to me. And at some point, this image, you can find it on my Instagram, but there's directions on how to eat a tortilla as well, which I have to think Girard was part of as well. Susan, of course, as well. As you said, he designed the matchbooks. There are multiple different versions of the matchbooks, both the paper ones and the wood ones. The wood ones are pretty amazing because you can see, hopefully it shows here, that each of the match heads are a different color. And so those colors are just as vibrant as the outside, which would probably indicate that Girard had a specific matchmaker he liked working with. The fact that sugar cubes still exist, from the restaurant, that people put them away and saved them. I'm always amused by that. So that little the blue thing next to the coffee cup is a sugar cube, an unwrapped sugar cube. And of course, he designed all the ceramics. He designed the silverware, he designed the ceramics, Mayer China, which is one of the main producers of restaurantware, produced a line specifically for that restaurant. And this liveliness, which I love, and I love thinking about how this is an architect that is focusing in on the space and your experience repeatedly, and does it in color. In contrast to that is the French restaurant Étoile, not far down the street at the time of La Fonda del Sol. And this one, while there aren't a ton of colored photos, these travel photos grab the what was once the dessert display all the way out there on the right, fresh flowers on the top, an open petaled flower, and then the dessert sat there daily for you to choose as you walked to your table. This restaurant and the paper attached to it is very hard to come by. You know, I would love to know where any of those daisy tables are, so if anyone has a daisy table. You know, and again, this is one of those environments that is clearly Girard, and this is Girard's font, this is Girard's design. Those are chairs that he worked with Charles Eames in designing. Well, La Fonda del Sol, he worked with Charles Eames to design those. The paper stuff is ridiculously difficult to find, although I have been lucky enough, imagine my surprise, to open up an envelope and find a sugar packet in it at one point that Girard had mailed to a client or a friend. And so there is a sugar packet from Etoile. This, while La Fonda del Sol celebrates the sun, celebrates folk art, this environment is just so stripped down to lettering and black and white and a real font focus, which I do love. The ashtray in the top right, I just got a couple of months ago. I was working with a family who was liquidating some stuff, and the woman said, you know, I don't know if you'd want it, but I've got this ashtray from his French restaurant. And it had long been on the top of something I wanted, you know, from that. Oh, I'd love to own all of it, but I find this ashtray, that is a table napkin on the bottom right. It's a very, you know, papery kind of napkin. The center is the menu, or the evening menu.
Now, we've been talking a lot about restaurant interiors. What is it specifically that you found that drew Girard specifically to restaurant interiors and the act of eating and fellowship and food specifically?
That's an interesting question. You know, if you look at his career after restaurant design, you know that you'd see that he and Susan redesigned their kitchen multiple times, trying to make it more Girard-like, I guess. In the last incarnation that's kind of photographed, there's large spoons and then, like, you know, clear plexiglass with tons of beans in it, you know, just very a way to display collections again. I just think that he was really good at designing interiors, right? And a restaurant really wants you to feel at home. I think his designs make you feel at home. I think, I think his designs make you feel at home, and I think that there's also something a little bit more permanent about restaurants rather than a product. You know, a product ends up being consumed or used, or you don't get to see it again. While I don't really have any photos of Girard in either of these restaurants, we have photographs of Salvador Dali at Les Etoiles, and I have photographs of Girard before La Fonda del Sol opened. I imagine that there are restaurants that he visited. You know, I mean, the La Fonda del Sol menu actually had dishes that he and Susan enjoyed. There's magazines that have like their recipes for different dishes that were there as well.
So Alexander, as you mentioned, was of course an architect and designer, but Girard was also a craftsman and artist, and he made some beautiful, unique works, particularly sculptural objects. Please tell us about some of the amazing, unique pieces that you've found and been able to acquire.
So, you know, obviously, as with any estate, estates get liquidated, and some things do go to museums and some things end up on the market. I came to my collecting long after things had sold at auctions and things, you know, things have been dispersed into other collections. But I have had the opportunity to acquire a couple of personal objects. Here you can see this flower display. That's a photograph of it in our house. But on the left-hand side, you can see it photographed in the Girard house. A little more detail of it. You can see that it was a 1965 gift to Girard's wife. It has the Sanssouci logo, the interjoining S's, which make two hearts for Sandro and Susan. When I did purchase this, it was in some state of disrepair, and so I had a silversmith in San Francisco, a third generational San Francisco silversmith, do a couple of repairs to it. It was difficult because there's only very small photos that I have of it, and so he did a great job pulling it kind of back together. I also had the opportunity to purchase another image that Sandro had made, or it's a sculpture out of really just pressed metal. It's just flat cut metal, an image of the two of them crossing a bridge. I do really like this piece because on the top there's this moon and star, which does reappear. I'll just jump right down to it. The moon and star on this clock that he designed for his New York apartment interior design kind of show. But as part of that, having some of the personal objects, it has meant that there are personal drawings. It has meant that I've had to do a little bit of research to find these, what they are, right? This, on the left, you can see the sketch of a wrought iron screen. Girard's pen on the bottom, it's upside down on this, it says "My Room." And so don't know if it happened after it was made or if this was the plan for his room. But here you can see the ironwork executed at the top above the fireplace. And this is his upstairs apartment in Florence. And so this is a pretty earlier sort of drawing. There was a great revelation at one point where I was, thanks to the very large Todd Oldman book that collects a lot of the unpublished images that are in the Vitra archives. I was looking through it one day and I was staring at this wall that you can see all of these toasts, how to toast somebody. And then I realized that on the back of a paper, I have Girard's penmanship, in his hand, the planning of this. The words written out, I assume before they were executed on the wall. I'd like to think it was before he executed on the wall. Either way, it's in his hand and then ultimately executed in this designed environment. That same apartment had this clock that he designed, and I have a very small little drawing of it. Girard's environmental panels are many. He designed those for Herman Miller, and this is kind of a pencil sketch. It is a pencil sketch planning it. Having something like this that you can really see the process. I don't know if this one was for a different design because it is a 5-petal daisy, I assume, while the one that was executed for Herman Miller has quite a few more petals on it and some burnt ash in the paper. I find this to be amusing. I love this as just a graphic design aspect of planning and executing a design. I don't believe, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, if Susan Girard sold marmalade around town. Whether or not she did, she needed a label. And, they made her a label. And, by appointment, sorry, I now read that. It says by appointment only, so hopefully,
Girard was, as you mentioned, Girard was head of the textile division at Herman Miller Furniture from 1952 to 1973, and he was celebrated for his new applications of pattern and color in textile design, taken largely from the patterns, color, and textures he found in his collected work of folk art. Please tell us a little history about this diverse part of your collection.
Yeah, when I originally had said that I didn't buy paper, it was mainly because I wanted to focus on textiles. And I realized really quickly that that was the wrong thing to say because the paper that was associated with the textiles were also Girard designs. And so because Girard worked from, as you said, from the early 50s until the early 70s, a very long career in any profession or with any company, there's a lot of work. People often quote that Girard designed 300 different fabrics for Herman Miller over that time, but fail to mention that each of those 300 fabrics have 10 to 15 different variations. It could be a different color, it could be a different material, if something's printed on silk versus cotton, and I consider that to be a very different design. These two pieces, they're pretty hard to find. I most recently acquired the one on the right. It's much longer, and it's maybe like 5 more folds beyond this, but it announces the 43 editions. I don't know why 43. The other one announcing 59 editions. Both of these show Girard's graphic design work, his use of fonts, a font that on the left, the font mirrors his penmanship to some extent. I have a number of things where he uses that kind of curled writing just in his writing. Both of these are printed on extremely thin paper, like thinner than like a dress shirt kind of paper. It's just the thinnest of paper. And so obviously his textiles are really exciting for me, and the way to make a collection more complex is to collect the samples of the textile, not just the textile on the object, but the textile that was used to sell the textile. And so I have quite a few salesman samples sort of showing the main textile and then the other variations of it. On the left, the paleo textile, which again is one of my favorites. Here you can see it in 4 different variations. The top one being almost like a scrim. You can see right through it, and the printing on it is all in blue. There's no color variation. The second one down is silk, and that kind of gold color is gold, like it shimmers in the color gold. These of course were screen printed as opposed to woven textiles. On the right are the tablecloths that Girard designed for Herman Miller, and there you can see, of course, once again, someone might say, yes, he designed this one tablecloth, but as you can see from the top that there are also a few variations of those, which are pretty amazing. You know, and those variations, of course, are not easy to come by, and they make the collecting that much more exciting. You know, and I think that for anyone who is familiar with folk art and have seen, you might feel like you've seen these patterns before, right? And that they are folk art referential or, you know, traditional patterns used in a very different colorway, without a doubt. I've also been lucky enough to acquire a number of test patterns of Girard's, and I always find that to be super interesting because when you think of the fact that he produced so many textiles, that the textile companies needed to try out different things for him. Why they end up in where they end up, I do not know. This came from a woman up in Oregon who happened to find it in a fabric bin. And she saw Girard's name, she saw Herman Miller on it, contacted me, and these are 2 very common, they're not very common, but they're commonly known patterns of Girard, but definitely not in this color scheme. Can you see it? Because it's pink. It is bright pink with this very deep blue attached to it. And of course, to say that he designed 300 fabrics isn't even scratching the surface. I mean, you know, when you think of, while there's different fabrics themselves, there's different patterns, there's different color combinations. This is how you acquire way too many things. You decide that you need to have samples of every pattern.
But you know, that's really interesting because that's kind of how you get into the mind of the creative, right? And you get to see
100,000
that.
pieces of folk art.
Yeah, there we are. Right, exactly.
And of course, it's hard to tell from this photo, but of course, there's not just one example of each of these. There are multiple examples of some of them down below. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this aspect of my collection is that people oftentimes send me images of fabric that they have, or upholstery on chairs, and they want to know if it's a Girard fabric, or, you know, and the internet's a great place for discourse. And so there's often, you know, it's good to also be able to provide some documented evidence to say, I see how you can think that that might be Girard, but let's look at the actual fabric sample. Yeah, and you know, Girard, it's interesting when you think about how much fabric he made for, specifically for different commissions that he had, fabric that he made specifically for Herman Miller. But there's also an element of it that the textiles themselves are personal. These are things that Herman Miller distributed for a mere $3. Employees at Herman Miller or people who sold Herman Miller fabrics could buy an India silk tie that he had designed. Yeah. Which I mean, this is one of my favorite parts of my collection. Luckily, they're very hard to find, and so it kind of keeps you looking out for them quite a bit.
And you shared with me previously about how you did come across this. I think everyone would love to hear how you came across this little collection of these ties.
Yeah, I think 4 of these in this image, definitely not the one on the right, came from a Herman Miller employee who, had saved them. The family had saved them. They had saved a lot of textile samples, kind of the longer samples that were in the previous picture, came from them as well. And I was super excited to buy all of them from them, of course. And then when they shipped them to me, they shipped them in a 1970s Herman Miller box. And so the box itself has the great Herman Miller logo going around the corner. And then to my surprise, of course, to find the Herman Miller fabric logo, this kind of not very commonly seen tag attached to some of them is, it's great. Because that tag actually says, designed by Alexander Girard, and it's the form of what would be on the back of a tie. I've really only seen that label on these ties, and very seldom on a pillow or two, but you can imagine that someone would clip that off a pillow pretty easily because you love the pillow and not the Herman Miller fabric. What we can learn from his fabric, of course, again, that repetition of the folk art kind of design, coming out in a lot of his designs. I added these slides last night after we got back from the compound. We had dinner there, lovely dinner, thank you, and sat underneath the snake on the ceiling. And I was thinking to myself that, it's interesting to see the snake on the ceiling, which is on the right-hand side, designed in '66. The snake on the left, that's from Hemisphere, that's the side of the building in '68, reappears in '72 in an environmental panel on the left, the orange one, and then on the right-hand side, that's a throw pillow pattern. So it's a smaller version of that. And to see him, using that design, which if you've been to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, there is a little display about this image and the photograph that Charles Eames took of the drawing, the rock drawing of a coiled snake like this that inspired this design.
Talking with you, Vince, I have been amazed that you not only collect Girard's work, but you make a point of living among Girard's materials and works. What do you think makes him a unique and important figure in modern design? And is there anything that you've learned about Girard that has come specifically from living with his creations?
I think again, as I thought about the time at the compound last night, and it was the second time we had been there, it's not floor to ceiling Girard, right? There's a piece that highlights his work on one wall, you turn around, there's a rainbow on another wall. It's not that he loved color so much that he striped the walls in color, right? And that we try at home to live with Girard as respectfully as possible, in the sense that it doesn't make sense to put 20 different environmental panels up and down a hallway. We would then become a Herman Miller showroom. And instead, we actually lived for a long time with nothing on this wall, and I thought to myself, there's going to be at some point a panel that I'm going to want right there. And then I was lucky enough to find Knott's. This is a 1972 environmental panel. And if you don't know, Girard designed in '72 for Herman Miller these panels to go along with Action Office, the kind of original cubicle, the second time they released the original cubicle for the workspace, and they wanted to enhance the workspace with some images. And so the snake on the previous slide, this kind of Celtic-like knot is one of them. In this photo on the left, you can see that's a bench that Girard designed for the Scorn house. Bronze legs, 4 purses from Crete filleted open and kind of sewed together to make the bench. On the right, you can see Girard's executive desk chair designed for Herman Miller after he had done a lot of work for Braniff Airlines and designed all of their waiting room furniture and their office furniture. He released a line through Herman Miller that was very similar. It was the same sort of product for the home. Our dining room chairs currently are 4 of those very kind of office-looking chairs. We also live with Girard in our living room. Girard furniture it's amazing stuff. It's very hard to find. They only made it for a year, and so I don't have a ton of it, but what I do have, we really like. Before I had this table, I had a Noguchi table, right? And so it just made more sense to, in the spirit of Girard, change it out for it. I do use the pillows, like you can see the vintage pillows there on the couch as well. We've got some floor pillows kind of on the side by our fireplace as well. This is an ottoman that I purchased last year. It's a pretty unique ottoman over there. It has a vinyl pattern on it that's like a concentric circles that go out. It's almost like a record. It's a really interesting 60s design for him. And I've always loved the checked pattern. I have to admit that there's photos of me at 8 wearing slip-on Vans with the check pattern, and so I've been drawn to that pattern. Been lucky enough there's a footstool there on the bottom that's of the Girard line, just a regular side chair, another one of those executive chairs, but I took the casters off so we could use it in a different room as a permanent chair. And then the pillow that I bought from the museum here. When the museum was doing some fundraising to bring the Vitra exhibit here, they auctioned off that heart pillow. And so that was really my entry into knowing people here at MOIFA. We live with it. I enjoy living with it. There are definitely moments where I look side-eye at people when they want to sit on it, but yeah, I do.
Is there anything particularly that you've learned from living with the works? Is it increased your appreciation for his work?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I did say also about his line, you can see there in the middle, this is the original mailer from Herman Miller announcing the line. And one of the things about that line was that it was really Girard's mind, it was his design and his mind at work at best. When he presented to his audience, you could buy any of these chairs and you have 24, 25 different fabrics and patterns to choose from, and in his mind they all go well together. But for a customer, you would need to decide what was going to be the pattern on the inside, what was going to be the pattern on the outside, what was the welting in between. Well, you could have a different pattern on the backside, which I think made a lot of sense to Girard. That opportunity to say like, well, I have 15 to choose from. That means it's better. But in reality, I think that it makes it a little bit more difficult. I think that for me, mainly because I really like we live mainly with his kind of later designs, so the 1960s furniture line, as well as the environmental panels, which are 72. Those are kind of the predominant ones in our collection. Here at the end, this is kind of the last visual that I have, though. I was struck as I was listening to as we were walking through the museum just before we were here talking, that they were talking about how like a lot of the figures are all facing in one direction, but when people were cleaning the display, they discovered that sometimes there was one facing a different way. That like in the church scene, everyone looks like they're going to church, but there are a couple of people that Girard has pointed in the other direction. And it made me think of this, at first glance, the stars environmental panel, you think they're all 5-pointed stars, but if you look closely, you'll be able to see that there are a few 6-pointed stars here and there, kind of turned in a different way to make you interact with it. There are not, I think that we are we invite very enjoyable people over, but sometimes when we're eating dinner and I'm looking at this, meditating, let's say, on the knots panel, I'm always surprised at how symmetrical it looks, but then I notice something's a little bit off. It's not symmetrical, right? And that as the viewer, we're drawn into it, you know, and we're looking for those things that are just a little bit different.
Well, I think that's definitely one of the things that makes Girard such a powerful creative force, is that it is that the element of surprise, right? I think it's what drove him to the folk art and the toys and things too, is always having that element of surprise. I think that's why people are so amazed by going into multiple visions and experiencing, because they're surprised. It's a real surprise to interact with that space, and it's really wonderful to how he designed that to maximize that. It's really wonderful.
Well, all the way to the right there is, because not a lot of people see it, because there's not a lot of it out there, Girard took a lot of his patterns, his textile patterns, and turned it into wallpaper as well for Herman Miller. And so sometimes, you know, the mind that would say this looks great on a piece of furniture, but it also would look good on your windows, and it also is going to look good on your walls, you know, is a creative mind that is always thinking of another application of a design.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your personal story and passion for the work of Alexander Girard. And please join me in giving a round of applause to our wonderful presenter, Vince Bravo.